In a company should be similar to what you look at in a company as developers applying for a job there. Yeah, and for the past few years, I've been running a company called Toughbyte. We're building a tech recruitment platform and helping developers find jobs. So in total, we've probably found jobs for about 200, 250 people so far. So, and we work both here in Helsinki, but also in other places in Europe. So since we're such a small group, maybe we could do a quick round of intros. It'd be great to hear like your name, your background as a developer, and sort of what you're looking to get out of this workshop, I suppose. So maybe we go.
I can start.
Yeah, or whichever order in. Yeah.
My name is Alina, and I have been coding for since the beginning of this year. I'm interested in front-end development.
Okay.
At the moment, I'm doing an internship at the Shortcut.
Okay.
As a front-end developer.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is I'm also pretty big on meetups. So I've started a few big ones, and I'm currently running the Helsinki Javascript Meetup, which is one of the biggest developer meetups in the country, and it's aimed at like people using JavaScript, so front-end developers. So you should definitely pop along to that. But I'll share a link later. Cool.
Yeah, my name is Sofia. I'm actually a designer.
Okay.
But I'm interested also in.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things I talk about are actually just as applicable to other sort of roles that have some sort of a technical component or product component to them, not necessarily developers.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, are you like what stage of your career are you at? Are you?
I'm here in Short.
Okay, so we're pretty early in your career as well. Awesome. Okay.
I have interesting stuff. So it is for me and also for my wife. So I will put both the scenarios.
Okay.
I need your help.
Sure.
One about me. I've been in business development for 10-15 years.
Okay.
But I have been qualified as a data scientist 10 years back.
Okay.
But now wanted to take up more data scientist, more from a business analytics standpoint.
Okay.
And maybe at some point I have to take the path of data scientist. So how do you see that? I guess it's a bit old, and now it's all Python and R, which I'm currently more brushing up. But I was more used to SPSS and SAS. Those kind of things, and a lot of domain knowledge is already exist in me. Mm-hmm. That is about me. And about my wife, she has been a Java developer she has been trained in mainframe, been a Java developer, and for working for 4 years till 2011.
Okay.
And then she had to take a break, and she was studying, and she was studying Japanese as a language.
Okay.
She studied that, and she came back to the technical industry more from a support angle. She was working in IBM and those kind of things back in India.
Okay.
So now this translation angle, there's no much scope here. And now she wants to go back to the developer angle and how she wants to start it again. So we are at some stage where we are exploring new avenues.
Understood. I think a lot of people see a career as like something that you can plan ahead. But really, it doesn't work like that. You end up making all sorts of detours and exploring different paths, and kind of the landscape is also changing. So there's new types of jobs emerging. So I'm sure all of us here will probably end up doing, some kind of work that doesn't even exist at the moment yet. So, especially, with pensions going away, people having to work until they're like 80 or something. Cool. But anyway, how about you?
I'm Darryl Craven. At the moment, I work in a startup company called Toughbyte, which makes IoT platform for electric car fast charging stations. Okay. So at the moment, I've been doing it, almost 2 years.
Okay. And is this your first job, or have you worked at other companies?
First job in IT industry. Before that, I've been just doing factory and forklift and electric stuff. Okay. Well, that's
IoT and sort of electric things, I guess, are sort of related. How did you end up in IT? Did you sort of study yourself, or did you attend some courses, or how did you?
I studied as a bachelor's.
Okay.
Networking side, but I just started I started doing the startup company. I started coding.
Oh, okay.
Before that.
So the startup is your own startup then, right?
No, it was a school in Pom. That's a bachelor's thesis subject. So I went there.
Okay, cool.
Now I'm just looking for a new place.
Okay.
I'll be looking for 3 months.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Since we're such a small group and there's quite a lot of content to cover, and we started a little bit late, I think what we can do is we can kind of make this interactive. So I'll talk pretty fast, but but try and cover a lot of ground. And if there's some things where you feel like, hey, I'd like to actually discuss this in more detail, or have some questions, don't hesitate to interrupt, and we can discuss that in more detail. Okay, so let's kind of start at the very beginning. Why do you want a new job, right? So, it's a kind of a strange thing to ask, but sometimes, you might think, well, I need to pay the bills or something else, or it's my first job. But I think it's important to answer those questions for yourself, because if you don't, you can end up sort of wasting a lot of your time and potentially the time of the companies you work at, only to realize that the companies you're talking to or looking at aren't the ones that you want to be. And you sort of need to kind of plan things ahead. I guess leading on from that is, once you figured out why you want to change jobs, or why you want to, have your first jobs. Hello, please join. We're just doing introductions, so you arrived at a perfect time. Everyone else has introduced themselves. Unfortunately, we don't have time to rerun those introductions, but if you could say a few words about yourself, like your name and your background, how much experience you have as a developer or working in sort of IT field.
All right, I'm Franz, and I'm working as a youth. I nearly finished my internship at the Toughbyte as a technical intern. Okay. Well, and my main job as an intern is making application as a front-end developer.
Okay, cool. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, so here's a slide about me. But in addition to these things, I also run Helsinki JS, which is one of the biggest developer meetups in the country. So if you haven't been to Helsinki JS, you should definitely check it out. Cool. Great. Moving on. And then finally, once you figured out what it is that you're looking for, you should, we'll go into more detail about what you should be looking for and what are the things you should consider. But what flows from that typically is an understanding of whether you want to work in an early stage company or a later stage company. So a startup or maybe a startup that has already kind of raised a lot of money and is generating revenue, or maybe it can even be a company that's existed for decades. And also whether you want to work on a product or you want to do consulting. The difference being that if you work on a product, essentially that's the only thing that the company does, whereas if you do consulting, the company that you work for is a service provider and you end up working on many different client projects. And then the last option, which I think is becoming increasingly more relevant nowadays in Finland, is since the market for developers with experience tends to be quite hot. So if you have the right kind of background and 3 to 5 years of experience, then I think going freelance is a very viable career option as well. Okay, but there's some strangeness in the slides. Cool, so let's move that slide back there. So what is it that you want from a job? So some people might want a nice office with a great view and a slide and ability to take naps in the middle of the day. As you probably know, there's a site called Stack Overflow, and it's a Q&A site for developers, and they do these developer surveys once a year, where they ask all sorts of questions, but one of the questions they ask is, from developers all over the world, is what is it that you're looking for in a new job? And what I've done here is I've listed the top sort of things that developers have listed as the reasons, or as the things that they're looking for in a job, in order of priority, actually. Strangely, that survey question didn't include a question about money, but I think it would be a bit naive not to sort of mention money, so I've included it here as a last point. But I'll just kind of run through these really quickly to maybe open them up a little bit. So when I say tech, what I mean is the specific technologies that you would end up working with. I think that's very important. Or if you're a designer, maybe it could be something like the exact type of design that you would be doing and the tools you would be working with. The reason that's important, I suspect, and the reason it's the top of the list is because as a developer, you constantly have to be learning new things. And if you're not careful, one of two things can happen. You can either learn a technology or a set of technologies that become obsolete in a year. For example, if you were learning Flash, now no one is doing Flash. But obviously some of the skills you may have learned would be transferable to other areas like front-end development. Or you can end up in a situation of sort of complacency. So for example, if we talk about Java, there's been a need for Java developers for a long time, and there's still a need for Java developers. But Java jobs are not trendy anymore. So what has happened is that companies that use Java tend to be quite sort of old school, and set in their ways. Anyway, moving on, culture. So this is sort of the company culture and the working environment. Flexibility plays a very big role. So I think as developers, we have sort of the freedom to choose oftentimes where we work. So actually making sure that you go for an option that has a good work-life balance, where you're able to work remotely, where you have flexible working hours, all these kinds of things is important and something to think about. Especially since development, in any technical work is kind of creative work to some extent. So if you lack that flexibility, then you actually may end up being less productive in your day-to-day work. Then professional development. So how do you want to grow as a developer? Do you want to work, doing the same stuff? Do you want to learn some new things? Do you want to work in a team? Do you want to become an architect? Do you want to become a lead? Are you more interested in the design side of things? All these, like, which direction do you want to go in? And typically, if you work at the same company for a long time, then, sadly, as developers are doers, and oftentimes, people that do things tend to be more valuable in the role that they currently have, if that makes sense. So it's easy to get stuck in a rut when it comes to your career progression. Then location is an important one as well. I already mentioned remote work. Impact, I think, is a very important one. There's surprisingly a lot of code that's written that basically is never used by anyone. And it's never even gets as far as being rolled out to production. So if you want to be a developer that feels like you're actually, when you're a developer, the work that you do is quite abstract. So you end up doing something without understanding how it benefits the world or the users. So I think having a job where you can see the results of your work, where you can see your code being used by people and your code running into production quickly and not like 6 months later or a year later, I think is very rewarding and a great motivator. Yeah, and then last but not least, money. Or also maybe other benefits, since there's other forms of compensation other than just money. Okay. Before you start looking for a job, you should have a plan, and you should approach it in a kind of a structured manner. When a startup, for example, raises funding, at least if it's done professionally, or if it's done by investment bankers, what you tend to do is you tend to create a process whereby you identify who are your potential investors that you'd like to receive money from, and then you kind of run a process whereby you talk to all of them at the same time, start talking at the same time, so that at the end of the process you end up having investment offers from multiple companies. And the way companies hire people is also the same. Like they prefer to have multiple candidates in the pipeline rather than just one, so that they're moving through the pipeline at roughly the same speed. And then they have a few candidates to choose from so they can compare. So it seems sort of silly as a developer looking for work to sort of not do that and take an ad hoc approach where it's like, well, whatever opportunity pops up, I'll go along for that. Because you're basically putting yourself at a position of a disadvantage. Whereas if you apply to multiple positions, you've done your research, you prioritize the companies you actually want to work at. You have a long list, and you gradually, as you can work through the interview process, the list gets shorter and shorter, but not too short, so that at the end of the process, you have offers on the table from multiple companies. That gives you leverage in potential contract negotiations. One thing though to realize is that because it's a process, and if you want to do it properly, you need to be talking to a lot of companies. Each company tends to have between 4 and 6 interview steps. It can take anywhere between a couple of days to a week between steps. You have to realize, some of them give you home assignments. Some of them require you to come in for interviews that last 1 or 2 hours. Scheduling all that takes time. So you really have to realize that you really need to sort of have enough time to do this. So, for example, if you already have a day job and the day job isn't flexible, then you have to be realistic about how many companies you can be interviewing with at the same time. Yeah, and last but not least, unfortunately, the fundamental truth about sort of recruitment in general and tech recruitment in particular is that the process of hiring developers is broken in a lot of companies. Many companies do not know how to do it properly. And as a result, there's a lot of miscommunication, and also there's a lot of sort of unnecessary overhead in the process. So even if you're a great developer, you have to realize that sometimes you will be rejected. So you need to be prepared for that and kind of take that in stride. But that's all the more reason to be running it as a process, so that if you get rejected by one company, you have at least a few other companies you're still talking to. Okay, so how does one actually go about finding companies to sort of talk to and apply for jobs at? Well, you can start with Google. You can try and come up with advanced queries. But if you're in a position where you're not currently working somewhere and you can be public about the fact that you're looking for work, then probably the easiest way to let the world know and that you're open to opportunities and have them come to you is to update your LinkedIn profile and just put in your description that yes, you're open to new opportunities. Because there's recruiters that spend all their days sitting in LinkedIn and they have searches and alerts set up for keywords like that. So the moment you do that, you'll pop up on someone's radar, and chances are they will probably approach you first. And it's also a very easy thing to do. Obviously, if you're already employed somewhere, then that's not something you can do. But then the other stuff that I mentioned here is applicable. So you might be tempted to just go to some jobs board, like one. LinkedIn being the most popular one, I guess, is the obvious choice. And then just to look at which, set up the filters there and apply to the jobs that match your profile or that match your interest. But in a way, if you do that, you're limiting yourself because a lot of jobs are not advertised on LinkedIn. Since it's quite expensive to advertise jobs on LinkedIn, it's a lot of hassle. It costs like 300 euros per month to post a job there typically. So you should also check out a bunch of other sites and do your own research on the companies that might be hiring. Okay. I've listed a few that are sort of specific to Helsinki, but LinkedIn is the top one. And there's Donetori, which is a free site that has a lot of job ads, but from, I would say, more traditional companies. Then you have the Hub, which has more startup type of jobs. Also, you can do additional research on the company. So on LinkedIn, you can see how many people are already working there, how fast it's grown, so how many people they had a year ago versus how many people they have now. There's a good site called Glassdoor, which unfortunately isn't that popular in Finland, but some companies do have profiles there. But that gives you additional information. So there you can read reviews of what it's like to work for a company from their employees or ex-employees, and they can be left anonymously. So there's most of them are truthful, and also they also sometimes share salary levels at those companies, so you know what to expect.
Is Frank one of them as well?
Frank?
Yeah, Meet Frank. Really?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Meet Frank doesn't work like a traditional jobs board. You need to create a profile first. But yeah, that's another option. If you're okay to do the work of creating the profile and signing up for the service. Then you've got some aggregators like Indeed, Jubal, and there's a bunch of others. They're pretty good too. They do some of that sort of heavy lifting for you, so you don't need to do the research yourself. But the thing to keep in mind there is that sometimes they aggregate their old jobs, so you might end up sort of applying for a job that was filled like a year ago. So yeah, do your own research and actually build up like a spreadsheet of the companies you actually want to apply to, and check out their own career sites. Don't rely on just LinkedIn. And then the last kind of like life productivity hack, if you will, is some companies have very convoluted application forms. They expect you to write a super long cover letter, upload a CV in a specific format, film a video of yourself talking about whatever. And typically companies that have such complicated application forms are also ones that have broken hiring processes. So, you should maximize the sort of a potential sort of output of the work that you do and apply for companies with the easiest application forms first. A bit of an aside on working with recruiters. So if you update your LinkedIn profile saying you're open to opportunities, you will likely be contacted by recruiters. So at Toughbyte, we, in addition to building a platform, it's just part of the puzzle. We also actually operate as a traditional recruitment agency, so have a lot of recruiters that we employ that are part of our team. And so this is a bit of I may be a little bit biased here, but I'll try and give as objective view as possible. So essentially the issue, and when I talk about recruiters, I mean external recruiters, so companies that find developers for others that aren't looking for developers for their own firm. Those are called in-house recruiters. So the thing to realize is that unfortunately there's very many bad recruiters out there, and if you start working with a bad recruiter, then you can kind of close doors that otherwise may have led to some results, may have led to a job, and you also can end up wasting a lot of your time and even put yourself in an awkward position with a potential employer. So some of the sort of telltale signs of a bad recruiter are ones that aren't willing to answer your questions by email, but insist on calling you first and like only want to talk on the phone. There's a lot of recruitment firms from the UK that tend to do that in Finland. Some recruitment firms, if might not even have a contract with the clients, they might be fishing for your CV so that they can then use that CV to actually get a client. And then there's other recruiters that take what I call as a shotgun approach. So they don't understand the technologies, they don't understand what you're looking for, and instead try and get you to apply for every single position. Again, your time is valuable. Even if you were to sort of start the process with all those companies, it would take up a lot of your time. So the recruiters that don't try and understand what you're after, what your needs are, is not a good one to work with. The upside though is if you manage to find a good recruiter, then they can be a massive help. So sometimes recruiters work on positions that aren't advertised anywhere, including the company's own sites. In fact, we run into that a lot because there might be another department that manages a career site, and it's some hiring manager that has an urgent need right now, and it takes them like a week to get the job ad posted somewhere, and it takes a few days for them to create it. So if they're already working with a recruitment firm that they trust, then they'll just go and sort of have a quick call and say, these are the kind of things I'm looking for. And as a result, there may be an opportunity that no one else basically knows about that you could end up applying for. Then recruiters can give you feedback on your profile, and they can help you sort of make sure that you present yourself the right way, which is great because it's better to get that feedback early rather than once you've already applied to a company and been rejected. They can help you prepare for interviews, so they can tell you a bit about what to expect and who the interview will be with, and so on. And also, this is probably the most important thing, is if you get rejected, and even if you don't, sometimes it's hard to tell how an interview went, and unfortunately companies are very bad at providing feedback, but a good recruiter will insist that the company gives feedback and will kind of communicate that to you. And then last but not least, a good recruiter is typically working on a commission. So it's in their interest to make sure that you get a good salary, like you're offered a good salary, so they can also help with that. Because negotiating salaries is a bit of a tricky subject, and basically if you don't do it right, you can actually end up sort of spooking your potential employer, whereas having a mediator helps with that. Okay, so assuming with that out of the way, what are the next steps? Well, you should basically start polishing your profile. And I'll go through this one step at a time. So, and I've also listed these things in order of priority. So what's the first thing you should focus on, the second, and so on. So as a developer, I would say, or in fact, any job nowadays, you should start with your LinkedIn profile. Because unlike a CV, which is typically shared sort of privately, and is difficult to find, even if you do post it online somewhere, your LinkedIn profile is there for everyone to see, and it's easy to Google and so on. The next thing is your GitHub profile, because again, that's public. And it sort of is a good indicator that people can basically take a look at your code if you have some open source stuff available, or something if you've uploaded some of your projects, and it goes to show that you kind of you're passionate about working as a developer. If you're a designer, then there's sites like Dribble, Behance, and others that are sort of the GitHub equivalent for designers. Although they're aimed more graphic designers, but I guess you have some UI designers showcasing their work there as well. And then after those two, then your CV comes next. I would say, because your CV is something that you typically share privately, so you do need it eventually. But if you're in a rush to get a job, I would probably not even worry about polishing your CV until after you've sort of taken care of the first two. Then if you have a site or a blog, it's good to make sure that those are kind of up to date. I know, having done this myself, that sometimes your personal site, you create it once, then you kind of forget about it, and if it hasn't been maintained, that looks worse than not having one at all a lot of the time. So try and make sure that you have some recent content or recent posts there. And then also your other social media profiles. There's two ways to go here, but either you could lock them down, or you can make sure that they are kind of potential employer friendly. Now, a lot of recruiters talk about how, or especially here in Finland, how you're sort of not supposed to use any other information you might find on the candidates in order to influence your decision as to whether to hire them. But the truth of the matter is, everyone does it. So people will try and look you up on Facebook. They probably will check out your Instagram profile as well as they can. And if you have stuff there that you maybe don't want your potential employers to see, then you should think twice about whether you should hide that, change the privacy settings, or maybe kind of edit it somehow. Yeah, and then finally, this is kind of a Meetup-related topic. If you sort of have given talks, or maybe are have a topic you'd like to give a talk about, then having a speaker profile, either on your site or it's something that you can include in your CV, but basically saying, these are the talks I've given as a developer, that's a very, very big plus in any technical recruiter's eyes. And you don't have to give a talk at a conference, or on the sort of main stage of Slush. There's plenty of meetups or events like this, but even like smaller or less formal ones where it's very easy to give a talk, and the threshold to doing it is very low. But that kind of goes to show that you went out of your way. And you're interested in whatever it is that you're doing as a developer. Okay, so let's then move on to LinkedIn. I mean, essentially, LinkedIn tells you what you should do to complete it. So I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but make sure that you have a complete LinkedIn profile. You have a photo, you have a description, you've listed all your relevant jobs. For each of the jobs, you've listed what you've done at that company, what your role was, what you achieved. Also, add contacts. So it doesn't have to be people you worked with. It could be people you meet at events like these. But from people you've worked with or people you've studied with, make sure you ask for references, because references look impressive. And also, you can ask people to endorse you for skills. I think recruiters that have been in the game for a long time know that LinkedIn skill endorsements are completely useless. But the upside of being endorsed for a certain skill on LinkedIn is that you will appear in searches. So even if they're useless to verify whether you actually know that subject or not, they are useful from a discovery point of view. Okay, GitHub. Essentially, what you want is show some recent public activity. And you can have private repositories on GitHub, but you should make sure you have public ones as well. Ideally, ones that you created, so not just forks, so copies of other repositories that others have made that you've made some small edits to. It's also good to try and show completed projects, not like a project where you made one commit and it's kind of called initial commit and that's it. There's nothing else there, and the documentation is missing. There are no tests. And then the whole thing was kind of half-baked. It's much better to show the completed project, however small, and also show the work that went into making that project, so the intermediate commits that were made. Yeah, and kind of the next level up, I guess, if you're an open source contributor, or even if you're not, but you feel confident enough to try to contribute to other projects, then show some activity on other repositories as well, like pull requests that you made to fix some bug in some library you found, or reporting of some issue to some other project. That's really good too. Cool. Next up, your CV. So essentially what you want to do with your CV is you want to keep it to two pages. Don't make it longer. In fact, even if you keep it only to 2 pages, chances are no one is going to read the whole thing. But it's kind of part of the dance of getting a job nowadays. So you do need to, have one. You can format it as you will. You should probably try and include the same information you already have in LinkedIn, but you can open up certain topics and you can dedicate more sort of real estate to things that you think are important. But don't try and put too much stuff in there or try and list all the technologies you worked with. When you share your CV, I recommend sharing it as a PDF, because sometimes people, like external recruiters, they're bad, or even in-house recruiters that think they're doing someone a favor, might go in and start editing your CV if you send it as a Word file, and actually then mess up the formatting, or somehow else sort of misrepresent you. So yeah, if you send it as a PDF, at least you will know when someone wants to edit it.
You can easily convert it to Word.
Well,
So
the thing is, PDFs cannot be converted to Word that easily. Usually, if you try and convert a PDF file to a Word file, it's a lot of manual work. Or if you do it completely automatically, it'll end up
really
looking right.
Converters.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
But anyway, that's an aside. Usually, you can tell if a CV has been tampered with. And finally, I guess if you want to do this properly, and if there's like some companies that you really want to get the job at, then it's actually not a bad idea to customize your CV for each position. So there's ways you can do it so that you can kind of keep track of the different versions of your CV. But a bit of customization will go a long way. Okay, what are the things you should look for in a company or in a job that you apply for? So I'll kind of list them in order that I think is important. I would actually say it's a bit different from the one listed here. So the first thing to make sure is that the role matches your skills and your interests. So what are the must-have technical skills for a position? Sometimes that's extremely hard to determine, unfortunately, because job ads are written very poorly. People say, we want motivated, passionate developer who will work on our amazing system and do this and that. And you're like, yeah, but what do I need to know? Like, what would I actually be working with? But usually you can kind of figure it out. What's the must-have skill for a role and what's the nice-to-have skill. Then the other things that you might not figure out from job ad, but you can probably figure out from some of the initial conversations you have with the company or the recruiter working for it, is what will your work entail. So especially in earlier stage companies, but even later stage ones as well, you sometimes end up in positions where it's like you apply to be a developer, but then all of a sudden you need to do a bit of UI design, and then there's a server that needs maintaining, and before you know it, like the definition of your role becomes really broad, and you're unable to actually learn and specialize in any one area. So those may be the kind of positions you want to avoid. Then other things related to the role are, what's the workflow? So, people talk about agile, but it's become like such a sort of a fluffy word that unless you sort of specifically ask exactly how will I know what to work on, how will the tasks be created, will someone be reviewing my code, will I be working in a team, will I be working with a designer, will my code be tested by a manual tester, all these kinds of things. If you don't get good answers to those questions about what your sort of work routine will be like, then chances are the company is a bit of a mess, and the work will be very stressful and far from ideal. Also, a lot of companies still work in a very sort of a waterfall type of way, so they end up having very fixed deadlines, and essentially developers have to sort of cram and do a lot of overtime in order to meet those deadlines. Those are probably also the kind of setups you want to avoid, and rather steer for something that's more of like a Kanban type of a setup, whereby it's kind of continuous work, and the goal is to kind of just maintain momentum rather than be called constantly crunching. to meet some sort of a deadline. And then lastly, the team. So essentially, in order to learn and improve as a developer, you need to be working with people that are at least as good and ideally much better than you. And if you feel that people like that are missing from the team you'll be working at and the company you'll be working at, then again, even if the money is great and the office has a slide or whatever, then that probably won't be an ideal job, and you'll probably start thinking about other options about it, 6 months to a year down the line. The other things here, the second important thing I would say is the interview process. And this is because, like I said earlier, a lot of companies have broken interview hiring processes for developers. So sometimes some companies have very long ones, or some companies have what I would call unfair interview processes, whereby, in order to save themselves time, they make you jump through a lot of hoops in the beginning. So, for example, they might ask you to do a home assignment that takes 10 hours of your time before they even talk to you. Stuff like that happens. And again, just like a bad hiring form, like application form, this is something that you probably want to avoid. Also, very many interview process steps, or an unclear interview process where people can't tell you exactly who will be responsible for each step. Those are typically ones to avoid, because even if you are a fit for the job, chances are, somewhere along the way you will be forgotten, or something else will go wrong, so that you'll never actually get to the end of that process, having wasted a lot of time on it prior to that. Then the other stuff, kind of already touched on: environment, product. This is important, and maybe is related to the stage of the company as well. So, especially in earlier stage companies, it's easy to work on something that's quite vague but exciting. But you should take in the same approach as an investor. Like, does this product make sense? Does it solve a problem for someone? And is that something that someone will pay for? And are there people using this thing, or is it likely that people will be using this thing? Because if you work on something that no one will need or will ever use, then the impact of your work will be minimal, even though you might have a great time for the 6 months that you're working on this thing pre-launch. And then I guess another thing worth paying attention to is the management of the company. It's maybe less important, but especially in smaller companies, it does play a big role. So if the management of the company isn't technical, there don't have to be developers, but they need to have an understanding of how software development works. Then the chances are, it'll either be a very cushy job and not a very stressful one, but not one where you learn much, or it'll be an absolute train wreck where you'll be under constant pressure, and the development team is treated as a kind of a cost center rather than an enabler for kind of business activity. And one other thing, compensation, the salary and benefits are the obvious ones, but a good sort of a positive sign to look out for is training. Does the company offer training? So do they pay for your to take you to conferences, for example, or attend some sort of trainings? If they do, then that's a big plus, and that's something worth sort of paying extra attention to. Okay, so maybe we could there's a lot more content here, but maybe we could take a small break, and maybe I've been talking too much and too quickly, so we can maybe recap some of this stuff, and some of you might have questions with that in mind. If someone wants me to kind of give some quick feedback on your sort of online profiles, your LinkedIn, your GitHub, I could do that too.
We did a fun story though.
Okay.
Nigel Frank, the UK the company, they asked me to, in a position which I was rejected 2 weeks ago in Seattle. And he called me this week actually. And there's one position for this guy, was the same guy who rejected me. This position for the cloud developer role.
Right. Well, so that's the thing. External recruiters, unfortunately, don't always have visibility into the whole pipeline, so they might not know who else has been considered for that job. And sometimes companies, are so bad at managing their external recruiters that they end up having 5 different recruitment firms all working on the same position at the same time. So you can end up in a situation where that happens not once, but that can happen 5 times. You get contacted by 5 different people offering that same position. So But anyway, does anyone want some maybe feedback on their profile? Or yeah, okay.
So after the break, or now?
Or we can do it now, or we can do it afterwards as well. But I'm just thinking a bit of interaction here might go a long way. So whatever you prefer. If you prefer to give it to you in private, happy to do that. Or if you want us to go over it now.
For my LinkedIn.
Okay. And what should I search for?
LinkedIn first, right?
Yeah.
SU.
Yeah.
SU.
Yeah.
LAY.
That one? No, it's LAY.
The second one.
Oh, the second one? Awesome. Cool. All right, so let's make this big. Okay, well, are you looking for work? If so, you can mention that somewhere. Profile photo looks good. Let's see. Description looks great. It's not too long. I think that's good. Sometimes people write too much and no one reads that, so I think this is good. One thing I would maybe improve is I would mention the specific technologies that you're currently sort of looking to work with.
Okay.
The fact that you link to a GitHub profile is also very good. But let's maybe take a look at exactly how that profile looks. Oh, sorry. Let's see.
You just have to click on the link itself.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll do it this way. Okay. Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier, so it's good that you can see some activity that you've been working on stuff, but like I mentioned, like if you have forked repositories, then it's sort of unclear as to whether that's something you worked on or how much of a contribution you made. So, a technical recruiter that knows what they're doing will spot that this is something you worked on and this is something you worked on. And then, this is a little bit dated. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And over here, again, not that recent. So maybe, but this is much better.
It's funny, like, can I change those ones? Like, the one that come to default?
Yeah, I think you can. So there's...
I have more recent one.
Yeah. So I think you can. Let's not do it now, but I'm pretty certain that you can. Okay. The other thing you can do is if you have some very old projects that you're no longer working on, you can archive them. Okay. And then they're still visible, but they don't appear in this popular list. So...
Can you click on the repo and see?
On the what, sir?
The repository.
Which ones? These ones?
No, the big repository.
Oh, this one? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I'll do this.
Yeah, but maybe coming back to what I said earlier, it's better to have fewer repositories with more activity and more recent activity and things that look like completed projects that you created yourself from scratch. It doesn't even have to be something that's sort of user-facing. It can be just like a library, somehow multiply two big numbers together, something like that, but it needs to look like complete. So yeah, that's one area we can improve. And then let's take a look at your site. Yeah, not much, but I mean, you might want to tweak the transparency on the photo.
2 years old. So.
Okay, no, but this is very good. No, but this is very good because like non-technical people who won't get the code will then look at the photos, like the screenshots, and that'll likely impress them. And yeah, at the very least, even if the site is old, you've updated the copyright. So good job there. It looks reasonable, even if it's not. All right. So we've only covered about half the material, to be honest. But in a way, I think given where everyone is in their career, I think that maybe that's not such a bad thing. I can sort of fast forward through the rest of the slides. And also what I can do is I can share a link to all these slides with you. So you can then check them out later. I'll probably turn this talk into a series of blog posts where I'll go into more detail about more advanced topics.
You post it on Medium or?
Yeah, either Medium or probably on our company blog. But again, if I get your
You have a
contact,
Medium.
I do. Yeah, I do. But we have 10 minutes still. So I don't know. No one has any questions or comments? No? We can just zoom through the rest of the content really quickly, but I won't sort of spend too much time on some of that.
That is quite relevant at least for me. Like the bad things you say that happening in my company.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. So there's another slide there where I list like very bad things to watch out for. So we'll maybe pay more attention to that, because a lot of talks and workshops are like, what are the good things to watch out for? But sometimes you need to kind of like realize what are the things to avoid. And in a way, and this is kind of related to kind of career in general, or how to do a successful startup. Because every career, I think, and every startup is successful in different ways. But bad startups and bad careers kind of have similar patterns. So rather than trying to figure out like, how can I repeat something that someone else has done successfully in the past, you're much better off figuring out how to avoid the common mistakes made in the past. And eventually, by sort of exclusion, you will arrive at something quite good. But that's also sort of bespoke to you and a great fit for you. But anyway, let's we have 10 minutes. So we can sort of zoom through these, I think, real quick. Typically, once you start interviewing, you tend to have the interview steps might vary. Like I said, it's typically what we've seen is from 2 to as many as 10 interview steps. But essentially, they all fall in some of these categories. So you'll have a screening call at the beginning. Then you'll have what's called a culture fit interview. Then you have a technical interview or a series of technical interviews, and then you have the final interview. Screening call, some information on that in this slide, which will be shared with you. Then what I think is the most tricky, actually, is everything else you can sort of prepare for, but the culture fit interview is a pretty problematic thing, and it's problematic not only for developers, it's problematic for anyone else. And the reason for it is because no one, even the most sort of forward-thinking companies and that have good hiring processes, can really sort of clearly say what they mean by culture fit. Yet everyone makes a really big deal out of it, So, and also it's a way to sort of reject people, due to biases or stereotypes, without saying to your face that no, we don't hire people that have no prior work experience, or we don't hire people, that are too old or whatever. People that say, they weren't a good culture fit. But unfortunately, the reality is people are biased, and they sort of do sort of as much as they'd like not to be. I think the thing about culture fit is, you can try, or kind of interviewing in general, is that it's easy to maybe try and like oversell yourself, or not sell yourself enough. So I think you have to realize that when you're interviewing at a company, you are selling yourself. So you have to make sure that the other party understands, everything that you know, all your experience, and so on. And you do a good job of presenting that, but don't be too humble. That's not the time to be humble. At the same time, don't sort of go overboard and oversell yourself, hype yourself up to be much bigger or better than you are, because you raise the other party's expectations, and eventually, it'll kind of become apparent that maybe some of the things you said you're great at, you aren't great at, you're just kind of good at. Anyway, there's some links in this presentation that you can check out on culture fit interview. Then technical interviews. So there's a whole bunch of different ones. There's some automated ones that some companies give to you online. I would say those are probably the easiest ones to deal with, especially if you're a junior. It's a great way to be able to prove yourself. So at Toughbyte, since we're building the platform, we also have developers. We've hired like 5 developers to our team, and we use these with great success. But then, you also have your home assignment type of exercises, which are fine because you get to work on your computer in a relaxed setting, but you have to be very careful and ask up front, how long is this expected to take? Not how long do I have to submit it? Because they'll go, oh, there's no deadlines. No, but like, how many hours has it of actual work has it taken for other people to complete it? And if you get very vague answers saying, oh, some people can do it in an hour, but we've had people that spend 2 days on it, working 8 hours a day. So that's a bit of a red flag, because probably in reality it takes closer to 2 days rather than an hour. And you might have better things to do with your time than be writing some code that it's kind of pointless. Actually, that's another thing where a GitHub profile comes in really handy, because then in situations like that, depending on how confident you're feeling, you can actually suggest that, look, if you want to see what kind of code I write, here's something that you can just check out. If you have written some code that you can't share publicly, then that's okay to do as well. So you might have like some hobby projects that aren't polished yet, that you don't want to post as a whole thing on GitHub, but you might have a file that you could share, for example. That is another good thing that you can do to kind of address some of the problems that occur in tech interviews. The main problem with tech interviews is essentially that most people, or like a lot of companies, turn them into puzzles. So actually, one of two things happen. Either they don't vet your technical skills at all, but then when you actually get the job, or you start doing the work, you realize that this is a lot more complicated than what you signed up for. Or then the opposite happens. The actual job is quite easy. You're just supposed to be creating some site with some forms, right? But then you can ask questions like there are all sorts of puzzles. How to do algorithm. That I don't know finds the optimal route and this and that without having some of that theoretical background or having even come across that problem in the past, you won't be able to do for yourself. So yeah, some good resources on how to prepare for technical interviews. Yeah, then there's like typically you have a final interview. Now this is an interesting one. Usually it's like with the founder or the founders, and you have to be a bit careful here because sometimes it really is a real interview and they really will quiz you, and the outcome of that interview, will matter. But sometimes companies essentially already made a decision as to whether to hire you or not, and the final interview is actually an opportunity for them to kind of pitch you and also check whether you'd be okay with the offer they're going to make you. So you should kind of figure out which of those it is, but obviously not be too relaxed, because oftentimes, at these final stages, you can be rejected for, completely random reasons that, are outside of your control and reasons that you might not be able to predict. So you have to be a little bit careful here. So we've had cases where, people went into the final interview thinking that it was kind of a done deal because they'd done a great job and everyone else had interviewed previously said they were great. And they thought, this was the time when they're going to discuss the offer. Instead, it was like a second culture fit interview. And the fact that the candidate brought up salary in this interview was like a massive red flag for the HR person or the founder or whoever it was that was interviewing them, and then they're rejecting them, even though they were otherwise a perfect fit for the position. So they're like, well, literally, they don't actually want to work for it. They just want to make more money than at their previous job. That being said, the final interview is a great opportunity for you to kind of ask more probing questions. And one thing also to remember is, this applies to every step of the interview, but especially the last one, the last interviews, is that if you're unable to answer a question as well as you think you could in the interview setting, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from writing an email to the person with an answer, with a more detailed answer afterwards. Because typically people don't reject you on the spot. And what basically happens is if you write an email after an interview where you thought, man, I could have done a better job there, but then essentially that can sway their decision in like the favorable direction, even though they might have been on the fence about whether to proceed with you or not. Offer negotiation. I think here the important thing is to realize that it's a negotiation. So when people say unless the company specifically said that this is our final offer, we can't change what we've offered you in terms of compensation, benefits, etc., then you have to realize that actually yes, you can, and you should be able to. And there's a link to a good blog post on how someone went about negotiating sort of an offer for themselves. And then red flags. This is something that you might find interesting. And this is kind of more for stuff what happens after you've actually accepted a job, because sometimes you don't until you actually worked for a company, worked for the team, there might be all sorts of things that you're unaware of. So, I don't think that the interview process really ends with you accepting an offer and starting work. The interview process still continues in your first few months of work because you're in your probation period, you're easy to fire, and then also you should be sort of doing your due diligence and making sure that this is really the company you want to work for. But I've listed some things here that there should be red flags, and that if that happens in a company that you just started working at, you might want to think twice about choosing another job. And there's nothing wrong about sort of quitting during the trial period, because it's not going to look bad in your CV. You don't need to put it there. Actually, it would look a lot worse if you worked at a company for say 9 months and then left, because then there's like a big gap. But if you quit during the first month, then there's no need to mention it at all. Especially if you quit, because you quit not because you were fired. Yeah, and then the other things to keep in mind is when you start working, don't set the expectations of the company you're working at too high, and get to know people and try and get along with the people you work at. Don't take things personally or try to prove that you're always right in any sort of decision. And then really important, especially important during the trial period, is make sure you ask for feedback early. A lot of companies are bad at giving feedback, and you might realize that you think you've been doing a great job, you want to stay at the company, but actually a lot of things that other people think you could have improved, but they just haven't told you that, and they've only realized that they need to make a decision as to whether to continue working with you at the end of your trial period when it's too late to give you feedback. There's nothing you can do on. So that's it. Happy to stick around and chat to some of you if you have some questions you prefer to ask in private. But I'll try and get the organizers to get the links to these slides across to you.
We can do that. No problem.
Yeah, and also another option that's maybe a little bit easier for the organizers. I have some cards here, so I can just give these out, and then you can add me on LinkedIn or send me an email or whatever, and I can email them directly to you as well. Awesome. Great. There you go. There you go. No, absolutely. There you go. Cool. All right, there we go.